You think any company would hire old people? Don't be stupid." With those words, the interviewer sneered. Other employees in the room started to panic, trying to calm down the interviewer. "It's shameless for an old person like you to try to find a job, haha." Despite the other employees' attempts to stop him, the interviewer wouldn't hold his tongue. Was what I did really so wrong? All I did was try to find a job. Was that so strange? I couldn't understand why I was being ridiculed so much, but without the courage to lift my head proudly, I looked down and bit my lip. It was frustrating to be insulted like this and unable to do anything about it. So I decided to fight back. With a plan so unexpected, the interviewer couldn't have imagined it. "My name is Lexi. I'm a homemaker and in my 60s. I live with my husband, Nick. We fell in love at work and got married. At the request of my in-laws, I quit my job to become a homemaker and support Nick. Nick retired a few years ago, after working hard until his last eligible day. With our children out of the nest, we decided to spend our days, just the two of us, enjoying our time together. But then, a problem arose. Our daughter, Helena, fell victim to a scam. The total amount she was swindled was over $100K. A large sum for an ordinary homemaker to lose. Helena was harshly scolded by her husband, Paul, for being deceived. Demanding the lost money be returned immediately, he pressured Helena to the point where they had to separate. However, they still had a young child together. It would be difficult for Paul to raise the child alone as a single father, and Helena truly loved their child. She apologized desperately, begging, "Please don't divorce me." Then Paul said, "I'll forgive you if you return it within a year." However, it was cruel to expect Helena, who had been away from work for so long, to save up $100K. No matter how much she thought about it, she couldn't find a solution and came crying to me. At that time, upon learning the full extent of the situation, we tried to devise a plan to help Helena. Nick reached out to his former company asking, "Is there any way you could hire me?" However, in these times, the company seemed to be in no position to hire anyone. Should we use our savings? We thought about it, but spending $100K didn't seem feasible for a comfortable life thereafter. Realizing the dead end we were at, Helena seemed to reach a state of half-resigned acceptance. That's when my father, whom I had been discussing Helena's situation with, told me about a bank that was hiring. They were in desperate need of staff, and if I had the necessary qualifications, even at my age, I could get a job there. Moreover, the salary was decent enough that, while it wouldn't completely cover the $100K, it would significantly reduce Helena's burden. Then came the whirlwind of preparations. Gathering the required documents, practicing for an interview after more than a decade. There was no room for failure. Joining that bank was the only way to save Helena. "Mom, I'm really sorry. If only I had been more careful." Helena always apologized when she saw me trying so hard. But Helena was a victim, too. The real culprit was the scammer who deceived her, not Helena. As a parent, I should do everything I can. Nick was fully supportive of me. Busy with preparations, Nick took over all the household chores. Not only that, but he also made sure I had breaks, sometimes taking me out or buying desserts from famous stores to keep me going. With the support of Helena and Nick, I somehow managed to get ready, and before I knew it, the day of the interview arrived. I took a deep breath in front of the imposing building. Seeing us off, Nick and Helena said, "Good luck." That alone eased my nerves a bit. I had done my best in my own way up to this point. Now all I had to do was give it my all, and everything would surely be fine. I could help Helena. With that reassurance, I walked inside. Taking my seat, I noticed, as expected, that most of the other applicants were much younger. The bank Dad introduced me to was one of the largest in the area, with many branches and a large number of employees. Amidst this, I felt anxious about whether I could truly compete. My presence stood out among the younger crowd, and I could feel their glances, making me uncomfortable. But I had prepared myself for this, and it was something I had to accept. Still, I was determined to persevere. Seeking a moment of calm, I stepped out of the waiting room to breathe in some fresh air. Lost in my thoughts, I didn't see where I was going and bumped into a man in a suit at the corner. "I'm sorry." I quickly raised my head to apologize, realizing I couldn't afford a mistake here. The man wearing an employee name tag wasn't an applicant, but an employee of the bank. "Watch where you're going next time." He sneered at me, frowning as if he was angry about the collision. I knew I had messed up. "I'm so sorry, I'll be more careful next time." "Are you an applicant? Do you think it's okay to do this to an employee?" His words turned my face pale. Despite my resolve to make no mistakes, I hadn't expected to find myself in such a situation before the interview even started. I didn't know what to do, so I just kept apologizing. "I'm really sorry, please forgive me." All I could do was apologize repeatedly, desperately trying to get forgiveness from the man in front of me. That was all I could think of. "What's your name?" His question made my back sweat. What would happen if I answered? Should I respond? But what if it negatively impacted my interview? As I was trying to figure out how to handle the situation, a voice said, "What are you doing here?" I turned around to see another man wearing an employee name tag standing there. As soon as the man appeared, the employee who had been scolding me just a moment ago suddenly smiled and called out, "Brian, I saw she was in trouble, so I decided to help." He lied as if it was the most natural thing in the world, which surprised me. However, the male employee glared at me, as if to silently signal me to play along. "Is that so? Have you resolved your problem?" Brian, the man who was called, asked me. I instinctively replied, "Yes, it's all fine now." Not wanting any more trouble, I decided to abandon my break and return to the waiting room. Taking a sip of my drink, I realized how unreasonable the employee's earlier remarks had been. My mistake was just a bit of carelessness, yet how can someone be blamed so much for that? Despite that, it's not like there was any malice behind what happened. Moreover, the change in the employee's attitude when Brian arrived was unsettling. Even if I got the job, I wouldn't want to work under someone like him. As I pondered over this, it was time to head to the interview room. Taking a deep breath, I entered, and then there was an unexpected face. "Ah, it's you," said the man sitting in the interviewer's chair, sighing. It was the same employee I had bumped into earlier. Apart from us, there was another employee who seemed to be in charge of taking notes, but she didn't seem too concerned about the man's comment. After introducing myself, I was asked to sit down. I took my seat as instructed and the interview began. At first, I was asked the usual interview questions about my reasons for applying and my past experiences, nothing out of the ordinary. Thanks to my preparation, I think I managed to answer them properly. The mood started to shift after the basic questions were over. The interviewer said, "By the way," and then threw an unexpected question at me. "Do you often make careless mistakes like you did earlier?" I couldn't help but let out a, "Huh?" The interviewer smirked unpleasantly, almost laughing. "You don't remember? You bumped into me because you weren't looking ahead. Do you often make such careless mistakes?" "No, that's not the case. I was just nervous today." Is that so?" I didn't expect to be questioned about this, which caused me to become flustered and anxious again. Struggling to find an adequate response, the interviewer threw another question at me. "How do you feel about making such careless mistakes? Any remorse?" "Of course, I feel remorseful. I'm always careful." "Really now?" The interviewer looked at me skeptically. Sensing the sudden change in atmosphere, the clerk sitting next to the interviewer interjected. "Excuse me?" But the interviewer dismissed it, saying, "This is also part of the interview." This was going too far. It was just a small mistake, and now I was being scrutinized and treated this way. Is an interview supposed to be this grueling? Were all the other candidates pushed to their limits like this? With various thoughts swirling in my head, I found it hard to focus on the interview. I just wished it would end as soon as possible. My gaze naturally fell, and I had to fight to keep from looking down, maintaining eye contact with the interviewer. "Do you really think you'll get hired?" As I was panicking about what to do, the interviewer suddenly burst into laughter and started saying that. Confused about what was being said, I was shocked. The interviewer, laughing as if thoroughly amused, continued. "Do you think any company would hire old people? Don't be stupid." He laughed mockingly. The disrespectful remarks didn't stop there. "You know we're a major bank, right? We don't need to hire old people like some small companies do, trying to get a job at your age. How shameless." You don't have to say it like that. Besides, the job posting said even people in their 60s were welcome. That's just for show. Some people like you don't get it. But we don't hire fools like that. The way the man spoke filled me with irritation. It was too much to be unjustly blamed, subjected to such a stressful interview, and now to be insulted like this. The clerk sitting beside attempted to caution the interviewer with a, "Maybe it's time to stop." But such remarks did nothing to halt the interviewer's disrespectful behavior. Staying there any longer was becoming unbearably difficult. Why was I the only one subjected to this? Had I done something to deserve such treatment? Even after apologizing profusely and being cornered to this extent, was such a harsh attitude necessary? My irritation with the interviewer's behavior grew. I no longer felt the same panic or anxiety as when I had bumped into him, or when I was bombarded with unreasonable questions. I understand. That's unfortunate. I realized the interviewer, still laughing and mocking me, didn't know something very important. I had a trump card to teach him a lesson. I hadn't planned on using it, but after being insulted to this extent, I couldn't remain silent. Determined to retaliate, I reached into my bag. What I pulled out was my cell phone. The interviewer frowned upon seeing it. Taking out a cell phone in an interview? That's even more inappropriate. But since you're already not getting hired, go ahead. Hearing this, I didn't hesitate to make a call to a certain someone. "Hello, Dad, can you come to the interview, please?" I had called my father. Hearing my words, Dad asked, "What happened?" "I'm in my interview right now, and it seems I can't get through to this interviewer." Upon hearing this, the interviewer's face turned bright red. "How dare you say such thing to an interviewer? You think you can get away with that? Retract your words immediately." As the interviewer started to lose his temper, the clerk managed to restrain him. Over the phone, Dad, having heard the commotion, said, "I'm coming right away, wait for me." I hung up and sat back down, only to be yelled at by the interviewer. "What do you plan to achieve by calling your father here? It won't change the fact that you're not getting hired. Aren't you ashamed to cause so much trouble to others?" I didn't want to call Dad, really. I wanted to pass on my own merit. "Even with your father coming, you're still not getting hired. We can't hire someone with such an unreasonable attitude." No matter what I said, the interviewer kept repeating, "You're not getting hired," and "You're unreasonable." It didn't seem like I could, nor did I want to have a proper conversation with him. When I asked the employee sitting next to him if I could wait until Dad arrived, she seemed to understand the situation and hesitantly said, "Yes," allowing me to stay. Seeing this, the interviewer's voice grew even louder. "Get out of here right now! You should be in a place like this!" He shouted, unable to contain his anger. The clerk, pale-faced, looked on in shock. Finally reaching his limit, the quiet clerk spoke up. "Please stop. Do you know who this person is? She's the chairman's daughter." Startled by these words, the interviewer let out a dumbfounded, "Huh?" Indeed, my dad is an executive of this bank. The reason I considered this bank was that Dad, being the chairman, could offer advice if needed. As an adult, I wanted to handle things on my own and avoid relying on Dad's influence, but I ended up needing his help sooner than expected. The interviewer, now ghostly pale, remained silent afterwards. The three of us sat in the quiet interview room, waiting for Dad's arrival. Noise from the hallway grew louder, with employees exclaiming, "Why is the chairman here?" Realizing Dad had arrived, I felt relieved. Soon there was a knock on the door, and it opened after polite, "Excuse me." "Dad, I'm sorry for this mess." Entering were Dad and his secretary. Addressing Dad, he reassured me. "Don't worry, you did nothing wrong, Lexi." He entered the room. "Chairman!" As proof of me being the president's daughter was revealed. The interviewer looked at me stunned. Just like when we bumped into each other, he now seemed too flustered to even pretend to be nice. The interviewer startled and began to make excuses. "No, I was just trying to teach Lexi the harshness of society." "So you think yelling, conducting stress interviews, and spewing harsh words teaches someone the harshness of society?" "Well, that's..." "If I do the same to you now, will you appreciate it as a lesson in society's harshness?" Dad said that and gave the interviewer a stern look. Perhaps intimidated by his sternness, the interviewer let out a pitiful eek and fell silent. It's regrettable that an employee like you works at this bank. I had hoped our bank was filled with excellent staff. The interviewer was dripping with cold sweat at Dad's words. His tone was gentle, but his gaze was sharp, and I was relieved it wasn't directed at me. Dad has always been kind, but at the same time he's serious. He lends a hand to help the weak, but shows a greater hell to those who repay kindness with ingratitude. That's Dad's principle. The interviewer, now utterly frightened, knelt and apologized deeply. I'm so sorry. If I'd known you were the chairman's daughter, I would have never acted like that. Please forgive me. His trembling words sounded pitiful, hardly befitting an interviewer. Yet Dad remained unimpressed, saying, Even so, the one who suffered isn't me. Are you apologizing to the right person? Hearing this, the interviewer quickly looked up and apologized profusely at my feet. I'm terribly sorry for my behavior. I'll speak to my superiors about hiring you. Please, please forgive me. He was desperate for Dad's forgiveness. Seeing that, I couldn't help but let out a chuckle. I wonder how it feels to have to do this to someone who he was so condescending to just a moment ago. It would be too humiliating for me to bear. I'm sorry, but I don't intend to forgive you. I don't have the confidence to work in a company with someone like you. But... My words turned the interviewer even paler. Dad then spoke to me. If he's gone, would you want to work here, Lexi? Well, the other employees seem kind, and I like the atmosphere here. Hearing my words, Dad nodded, murmuring, Surely in my father's mind he had already decided what would become of this interviewer in the future. Shall we consider the interview finished, then? When Dad said that, the interviewer nodded, saying, Yes. With that, we left the interview room. Outside, a crowd had gathered, hearing the commotion, which made me feel a bit embarrassed. Later, Dad told me that the interviewer, citing various reasons, had requested a transfer to a regional branch. The request was granted after a meeting, and he's now working as a low-level employee in a remote rural branch. As for me, I was successfully hired as a teller at that bank. Despite the initial disturbance, most people eventually forgot about the incident, allowing me to work as an ordinary employee. Helena and her family reconciled, and now they're happily living with their second child. After all the hardships, I'm determined to do my best in this job I've secured.